She did it. In the most civilized coup in history, Sofia took the crown from her twin and became the Queen of Valia overnight. Her dethroned brother made statements of support and regret for his scandal and disappeared. Sofia made her first proclamation as queen, setting a tone of calm and order and a new bright future for Valia. Laszlo was so filled with pride for her, he was sick with it. He was also anguished by the way they'd parted, tortured by the things he had said and the things he hadn't. Did she think he blamed her for choosing her destiny over what he offered? Because it belatedly struck him that he hadn't offered her anything. He was in such a foul mood, Igor only came to him with the most pressing of matters. As he presented a handful of reports one afternoon, Igor quietly asked, "The Queen's Foundation Gala in Valia, sir. You'd asked me to make room in your schedule and prepare for your attendance. It's this weekend." Laszlo had texted Igor about the event while he'd been abed with Sofia that night in Madrid. In their sex-drunk midnight naivety, they had thought it would be the perfect venue to step out as a romantic couple. Her brother's exposure had ruined that. Aside from signing a letter on presidential letterhead that pledged his country's recognition of her new standing, Laszlo hadn't been in touch with her. There was nothing to be gained by seeing her, he reminded himself, except to appease this monster of a craving that was eating him alive. "I'll go." He tried to think of someone he could take as a date and was immediately repulsed by the idea. Eventually, he settled on a woman who worked with a mental health organization here in Prasovia, since the foundation, which had been started by Sofia's mother, benefited mental health causes. Laszlo made it clear this would be a networking opportunity for her and a cause he wished to support. His mother had had depression after his father's death and had never quite recovered. Aside from his security detail, he paid for the trip out of pocket, so he couldn't be accused of misusing government funds, not that he had unlimited disposable cash. What money he'd earned and invested during his previous life as a lawyer was held in trust until his political career was over. That difference of wealth between him and Sofia was another reason they had no future, and why he knew this trip was a mistake. But he hadn't appreciated how painful it would be to see her, or how agonizing it would be to see her see him with another woman. "Mr. President." Sofia was magnificent in a gown her mother had made famous shortly after becoming queen. Its color was a rich wine red with silver embroidery. A tiara sparkled in the complex arrangement of her hair. Matching diamonds dangled from her ears and encircled her throat. There Laszlo saw the shock and pain he caused her. The tendons in her neck flexed as though she had taken a mortal blow. "Please introduce me to your date." "How kind of you to come," Sofia said, past the dagger lodged in her chest. "It's lovely to meet you," she lied to the woman Laszlo had brought. "I wanted to show support for something close to my heart," Laszlo said, meeting her gaze. "Don't be cruel," Sofia wanted to say. In Madrid, as she'd been absorbing her brother's scandal and its implications, she had known immediately that she would have to choose between the crown that was her destiny and the man who in another life might have been her soulmate. She had made her choice and had to live with it, but the backs of her eyes were hot. It was the greatest test of her control that she held her welcoming smile and didn't let her cry of anguish break from her throat. She turned her attention to the next person in the VIP line, the ones given the privilege of being greeted by the Queen of Valia in her first public appearance. Her brother was beside her, proving his loyalty to her despite his ouster. They were deeply attuned to each other's moods, and he glanced at her, transmitting his concern at whatever tension he sensed. Sofia gave the barest hint of a dismissive headshake, and they went on with the night. Laszlo was determined to torture her, however. He danced with his date while Sofia was on the dance floor with the husband of one of the organizers. Laszlo had the temerity to cut in saying something about his date's desire to meet the man's wife. "Would you be so kind as to introduce her?" When Laszlo then held out his hand to Sofia, she had no choice but to let him draw her into the waltz.
I'm pleased to see you're moving on, she said stiffly, trying to ignore the way her body came alive from the mere pressure of his legs against the fall of her gown.
I haven't, he said grimly. I wish you would. She insisted only to have her hand squeezed in warning. What other choice is there? She asked in a faint hiss.
You are needed in your country as badly as I'm needed in mine.
They had made no promises, no declarations. A wide canyon sat empty inside her where those words of intimacy might have echoed and resided if they'd ever managed to say them.
Put that aside a moment,
he ordered, his voice lowered with concern. How are you? Still winded by overturning power and catching it in her own hands. Determined, but overwhelmed by the profound responsibility she'd taken on. Frightened she wouldn't live up to her own expectations, let alone anyone else's. Deeply grateful to her brother and a tiny bit resentful that he'd done this to her. That he'd cost her Laszlo. Fine, liar, he accused under his breath. The music was reaching its conclusion. Sofia could feel the tension rising in her that always presaged their goodbyes. This would be their last one. It had to be. She couldn't bear another. I really do want you to move on, she said sincerely, while it was an agonizing thought that another woman could give him what she hadn't. She said, I want you to be happy. The music stopped, and he continued to hold her in the stance while her skirt settled. Igor has my room number if... He began against her cheek. I'll send a car. They stepped apart. Their gazes remained tangled for one more second before they were forced to walk away. Weak Sofia berated herself as she changed and removed her makeup.
She immediately regretted her lack of a shield when Laszlo was shown into her apartment. Her entire being felt peeled to its rawest state, throbbing with sensitivity.
Her brother had purged the king's chambers during his brief reign, and she was awaiting some minor redecorating before she took them over. Part of her wished she could stay here in the rooms she'd had since she and Luca had left the nursery. She longed for one small thing to remain the same, but nothing ever did. Laszlo flickered his gaze around the silvery greens and soothing yellows, the sumptuous furniture, and the ceiling-high drapes that covered the windows. No balcony of shame here. Only a glowering palace secretary who noted the queen had dressed down in wide-legged pants and a comfortable pullover.
Shall I have the car and driver wait? Guillermo asked.
I'll text you when we've finished our discussions.
Guillermo left with the snap of a closed door, and Laszlo ran his tongue over his teeth behind his lips. Your butler disapproves of your hosting late-night summits, Prin. I beg your pardon, Your Majesty.
Call me Sofia, or I'll have you beheaded. She poured drinks, trying to keep from throwing herself into his arms. Her hand was unsteady, and the neck of the crystal decanter sang a musical note as it tapped the crystal glass.
He's the palace secretary, and has reason to be concerned. Because of your brother's recent troubles.
And my father's long history of them. She crossed the room to offer one of the glasses.
Being near him was like standing near a blaze. She craved the heat and light that filled her, but had to remind herself to be careful not to get too close, or she'd be consumed. Whatever you've heard or read is nothing compared to the things our staff has covered up over the years.
She sipped the strong scotch. Things even I didn't know until I came into this position and insisted on learning. It wasn't wise to be so loose-lipped, but in many ways she had always felt safe with Laszlo. She saw now that had always been his appeal for her. She could be herself in ways no one else allowed. A muscle pulsed in his jaw.
Do you want to talk about it? My father, no.
She took another sip of the searing alcohol.
Only to say that his appetite for sex and drugs and other things was more than a monarch's eccentric and questionable tastes. It was self-destructive and shattered his wife. It scarred his children, impacted the staff, and left our entire country in dire straits. Every time I give in to this need to see you, I fear that I'm doing the same thing. That's why it has to stop. Has to. He sucked in a sharp breath. You feel the same. I know you do, she said with an anguished, humorless laugh. Why are we even here now? This is the behavior of one with an addiction. Untrue. I'm cautious politically, he said crisply. But I'm not ashamed of what you and I do when we're alone. I'm offended that you are. He set aside his glass without tasting it and cupped her chin. You are a passionate, sensual, perfect person. I celebrate that. That's why I'm here. That's what brings me to you every damn time. She blinked at the poignant tears that rushed up to dampen her lashes. He dragged her close and smothered her mouth with his own. AA's Laszlo cupped her cheeks and kissed her with sweet reverence. Sofia clenched her eyes, squeezing the dampness from her lashes onto her cheeks. She had known bringing him here was a mistake, but she had thought her old guilt would be her punishment. It wasn't. As Laszlo rocked his mouth across hers, and her heart thudded in a slow, heavy rhythm that made her sway on her feet, she knew she wouldn't regret this. But she also realized that all of their stolen moments had stolen her heart. She loved him. As she slid her arms inside his jacket and up his back, he sighed and molded her closer, reinforcing to her how well they fit, how perfectly they complemented one another. She quit thinking, this can't happen, this shouldn't happen, and reveled in gratitude that it had. That she had one more night with this tough yet caring man. That she could touch him and drink in the scent at his neck and shiver at the skim of his fingertips down her spine. When they began to remove each other's clothes, they did it without hurry, the way one opened the most rare and precious of gifts. She folded his jacket as she set it aside, and he did the same with his bow tie and cummerbund. After drawing off her pullover, he let his fingers play across her collarbone and the points of her shoulders like a pianist lovingly finding favorite notes. Drawing him into her bedroom was an act of drawing him into her most intimate self. Not that she'd ever had many defenses against him. As their naked bodies brushed beneath the sheet, she had a flash of realization. We're perfect. Perfection was impossible. That's why they were impossible. We are. He sounded shaken. When he entered her, they barely moved except to kiss and caress. I will never want anyone else the way I want you, he vowed. It hurt her to think of him being alone, and hurt her to think of him with someone else. She put both out of mind. For this short while, they belonged only to each other. They held on to each minute, held on to each other as long as they could. Need and greed got the better of them, though. He began to move with more power. She clung and bit his earlobe and arched to take more of him. They reached their culmination in exquisite synchronicity that came back in rolling waves, redoubling their pleasure again and again until it finally faded away. They recovered and parted and lay facing one another, not speaking, using eyes and touch to memorize the other. When he rose to leave this time, she knew it really was their last goodbye. She refused to make it a bitter one. Not when he'd chased away ghostly fears that she was too much like her father. Laszlo had left her feeling pure and loved. Thank you. She set her hand against the sandpaper of stubble coming in on his cheek. I really do want you to be happy, you know. I want that for you too. He searched her gaze. If this is all we can have, she pressed her thumb over his lips. Don't tempt me. I'm grateful you helped me see that what we've had doesn't make me like him, but I still need to guard against being selfish. I won't use you. I'm inviting you to, he pointed out dryly. But she wouldn't. She wanted more for him. And putting his well-being above her heart's desire proved once and for all she was better than her father. When Laszlo finished dressing, he kissed her tenderly and said, "Good night, Sofia." "Not goodbye." Her heart wrenched with crooked hope. "I have to believe I'll see you again. Otherwise, what's the point in living?" Laszlo returned home to an early wildfire season that flared unexpectedly. Thankfully, no one was injured, but homes were lost and people displaced. His detractors went wild. Hash, where was Fabin? Hash, gallivanting. Hash, Valley vacation. His supposed affair with the woman who had accompanied him began making headlines, which infuriated him for the hurt it would cause Sofia. God, he missed her. He had put out his invitation for her to come to his hotel after the gala without thinking it through, compelled to see her privately in the same way he'd been unable to stop himself from going to the gala in the first place. When she'd sent the car, he had only wanted to get past the platitudes and learn how she was really coping in her new role. Her confession of fearing she carried some of her father's worst characteristics had shocked him. It explained the way she'd always left his room, as though dropping an axe on their time together. He'd adopted it himself after a while, and until Madrid had allowed himself to believe there was nothing emotional between them, only intense desire. It all made more sense now, especially why she had pushed him away the morning she had learned about her brother's scandal. She had to choose the crown. Yes, it was hers by birthright, but it was a matter of principle. She couldn't let her own needs take precedence over those of her nation, otherwise she really would be no better than her father. She was as frustratingly noble as her twin, and it only made Laszlo love her more. He loved her. He absorbed the realization with shock and a snort of laughter at his own blindness. Of course he loved her. She was independent, dedicated, and willing to do the work to make the changes the world needed. She was beautiful enough to start wars, but brought people together rather than dividing them. He had left his heart with her that night and was walking around with an empty chest, so hopelessly in love he could hardly eat. "I really do want you to be happy." How he would never be happy with anyone else, not if it meant scorning his Solence. There was no woman like her. The entire weight of Valia sat on her determined but slender shoulders, and all Laszlo could think was how nice it must be for her brother to abdicate his responsibilities and do whatever he liked. If only. "Wait a damned minute." Laszlo's heart lurched and his mind scrambled to catch up. He almost reached for his phone to text Sofia. He knew what she would say, though. She would tell him not to give up his aspirations on her account. But that's what he had presumed she would do. He had seen her new title as an obstacle that blocked any chance that she could be his. Did that make him any less hers? Laszlo still had goals and ambitions for Prasovia. Of course he did, but he had already accomplished the most important one. He had removed the corrupt party from power. More importantly, what he had learned about politics was that it had the same slow-turning wheels of process that had frustrated him as a lawyer. He had thought he would get his degree and bring his father's killer to justice. That hadn't happened. Then he had thought he would become president and have the power to extradite the killer. He didn't. Being a queen's consort wouldn't give him any more power to make such things happen, but he wouldn't have any less. He would still have the ability to influence politics behind the scenes where the real work happened anyway. The truth was, along with his occasional rendezvous with Sofia, the most interesting and satisfying work he'd done in the last few years had been at the UN conferences. He started making calls. Laszlo returned home to an early wildfire season that flared unexpectedly. Thankfully, no one was injured, but homes were lost and people displaced. His detractors went wild. Where was Fabin? Gallivanting. Valley of vacation. His supposed affair with the woman who had accompanied him began making headlines, which infuriated him for the hurt it would cause Sofia. God, he missed her. He had put out his invitation for her to come to his hotel after the gala, without thinking it through, compelled to see her privately in the same way he'd been unable to stop himself from going to the gala in the first place. When she'd sent the car, he had only wanted to get past the platitudes and learn how she was really coping in her new role. Her confession of fearing she carried some of her father's worst characteristics had shocked him. It explained the way she'd always left his room as though dropping an axe on their time together. He'd adopted it himself after a while, and until Madrid had allowed himself to believe there was nothing emotional between them, only intense desire. It all made more sense now, especially why she had pushed him away the morning she had learned about her brother's scandal. She had to choose the crown. Yes, it was hers by birthright, but it was a matter of principle. She couldn't let her own needs take precedence over those of her nation. Otherwise, she really would be no better than her father. She was as frustratingly noble as her twin, and it only made Laszlo love her more. He loved her. He absorbed the realization with shock and a snort of laughter at his own blindness. Of course he loved her. She was independent, dedicated, and willing to do the work to make the changes the world needed. She was beautiful enough to start wars, but brought people together rather than dividing them. He had left his heart with her that night and was walking around with an empty chest so hopelessly in love he could hardly eat. I really do want you to be happy. How he would never be happy with anyone else, not if it meant scorning his solence. There was no woman like her. The entire weight of Valia sat on her determined but slender shoulders, and all Laszlo could think was how nice it must be for her brother to abdicate his responsibilities and do whatever he liked. If only. Wait a damn minute. Laszlo's heart lurched, and his mind scrambled to catch up. He almost reached for his phone to text Sofia. He knew what she would say, though. She would tell him not to give up his aspirations on her account, but that's what he had presumed she would do. He had seen her new title as an obstacle that blocked any chance that she could be his. Did that make him any less hers? Laszlo still had goals and ambitions for Prasovia. Of course he did, but he had already accomplished the most important one. He had removed the corrupt party from power. More importantly, what he had learned about politics was that it had the same slow-turning wheels of process that had frustrated him as a lawyer. He had thought he would get his degree and bring his father's killer to justice. That hadn't happened. Then he had thought he would become president and have the power to extradite the killer. He didn't. Being a queen's consort wouldn't give him any more power to make such things happen, but he wouldn't have any less. He would still have the ability to influence politics behind the scenes where the real work happened anyway. The truth was, along with his occasional rendezvous with Sofia, the most interesting and satisfying work he'd done in the last few years had been at the UN conferences. He started making calls. Between seeing Sofia in the ballroom and visiting her private apartment, this was Laszlo's third visit to the palace since he had gone back to his hotel. Today he was shown into a formal reception parlor. The second he saw her, he felt as though he was breathing fully for the first time in months, even though she wore her most aloof persona, the one that told him she was very much on the defensive. She wore a navy blue skirt with an angled line of buttons from her waist to her knee. Her blue and white checked jacket was tailored perfectly to her figure. Everything in him wanted to rush to her and crush her close smell, feel her. But she wasn't alone. Prince Luca was with her dressed in bone-colored trousers and a dark jacket over a striped shirt and tie. The cranky butler was hovering as well. Had she felt a need for reinforcements? A chaperone? President Fabin? Sofia greeted with a cool smile and a brief handshake. It's nice to see you again. I don't know if you've had a chance to meet my brother. They shook hands, and the sharp glint in Luca's eye held a warning. What had she told him? They briefly exchanged diplomatic niceties before Luca excused himself, saying, Guillermo, I need you in my meeting. Sir, come along, Luca said with a pleasant smile, opening the door for the palace secretary and waving him through. As the door closed behind the men, Laszlo said, You told him about us. He knows we were involved, yes? The way she framed it as past tense made his blood prickle. My assistant wasn't given any preparatory materials. Her voice was strained. Is this a courtesy call? If so, it's not necessary. I told you before you left last time. I'm not involved with her. Her gaze crashed into his. She must have seen the animal rising in him. Her eyes widened and her breasts hitched with an uneven breath. She swallowed. The woman in the news, she asked stiffly. Natasha, yes. I think she has a good chance at being my successor. We're in talks as to how we would rally the support she needs before campaigning starts in January. Sofia's jaw went slack. You're not running. Not if I have a better offer, no. He lifted his brows at her expectantly. Laszlo. His name was a breath of shock. She took a few staggering steps, one forward, one back. He opened his hands to catch her, but she stayed where she was. He looked at his empty arms. This had been a gamble. He had known that, but he pressed on. It will take time. You should know that I'm asking you to wait. I know that's not fair, but I actually loathe the idea of you moving on with someone else, even though I realize you might have to. He choked on a lump of gall. It seems absurd in this day and age that you would marry purely to make the next king or queen, but I suppose that's how this works. It does. You don't have any real idea how restrictive this life is, how much pressure I'm under. Her eyes grew shiny with distress. I won't cage you into it. I can't, Laszlo. Don't give up what you have for me. He would do it for us, Laszlo said. Don't! Sofia was shaking with temptation. He was here so sharply handsome, she could weep at his sheer beauty. And he was offering himself. Her brother's words about breaking rules were ringing in her head. She wanted to break the worst one, the one where she put self-interest above duty and grasped at what she wanted in the moment exactly as her father had done thousands of times. But she couldn't do that to Laszlo. She couldn't do it to Valia. She shook her head, voice thinning. I don't want you to lose yourself in my life. You're not a man to stand in anyone's shadow. I would be standing in your light, Solency. The tenderness in his gaze was sweet, and it made an ache rise in her throat. He closed in on her, and she folded her arms between them, pressing her forehead to his jaw, while the rest of her trembled. Please don't do this. I don't think I'm strong enough to send you away. You are strong, Sofia. His hands rubbed her upper arms and shoulders. You're so strong, you scare the hell out of me. You walk around with a broken heart and withstand it because you must, but I won't break it again. I can't. I love you too much to do that to you. She gasped and closed her fist into the fabric of his jacket, pressing closer, letting his declaration sink into her skin and blood and bones. His hands ran soothingly up and down her back. The first thing I admired about you was that you understood how hard it is to keep wading into the fight when everything seems stacked to defeat you. When we were in Madrid, I formed this little dream that you could be my haven, my confidant, the person who made taking on such fights worth the blows and disappointments. Then we retreated to our separate rings, and I ached for you until it struck me. Why shouldn't I be that person for you? He was tearing her apart in the gentlest, most profound way. I don't know what to say. She lifted her head, tears leaking down her cheeks. Say you'll wait for me. Say you'll marry me when the time is right. Say yes. Queens did not marry commoners. Sofia had always known she would face a metric ton of pushback if their affair came out. Gaining approval to marry him would take more time than he needed to free himself from his own obligations. But all she could hear was him saying, I have to believe I'll see you again. Otherwise, what's the point in living? I'll wait as long as I have to. I'll marry you when you ask. I love you, Laszlo. Yes. He smiled, and the greatest joy exploded in her heart. When he crushed her close, she thought she would burst from sheer happiness. Their mouths met sealing in all the promises they were making to one another. Vows to support and share secrets and love with their whole hearts. Oaths to celebrate their love with the passion and hunger that never seemed to abate between them. Slow down, or I'll ravish you on that desk, he warned. Sofia had a feeling that desk had seen action in the past, but managed to collect herself enough to ask, if I send a car later? Yes. The palace staff gathered to see Sofia walk outside in her coronation gown and climb into the carriage pulled by 8 chestnut geldings. Thousands had collected on the streets of Valia for the spectacle, cheering in an unending roar as Sofia was driven to the cathedral where she was anointed before an assemblage of dignitaries from around the world. Given her tireless ambassadorial work over the years, she enjoyed international popularity. Still, it was noted by the press as remarkable that the president of a small country like Prasovia would have such a prominent seat during the ceremony. And what was the provenance of the startling aquamarine ring she wore? What was its significance? When the heavy crown was placed on her head, Sofia looked to Laszlo, and his solemn nod of deference and pride filled her with strength. The reception and ball took hours and would have worn her to the bone if not for Laszlo claiming a dance. He made her smile so happily the press picked up on their chemistry. Their photo went viral before the party was over. They didn't see one another again until Christmas, when they reunited after months of duty to their respective roles. They anchored in a yacht near Crete and were bothered by nothing but a few seagulls and one choppy day of whitecaps. As their idyllic time dwindled into its final hours, however, Sofia grew anxious. When they made love, her hold on him held shades of their old frantic desperation. My love, shh, I'm here. He pressed deep inside her, pinning her with his weight, while he touched soft kisses to her cheekbone and brow and lips. What's wrong? Are you sure, Laszlo? She cradled the side of his face and held him with the clasp of her thighs. There's still time to change your mind. When he went back in January, he would make the announcement that he was leaving politics. The dominoes would begin to fall. After his term finished, he would move to Valia. They would confirm their relationship, and in a year or so, they would announce their engagement. A wedding was 2 years away, at least. This is where I want to be, Sofia. He withdrew, then pressed into her, setting her alight with pleasure. I want to be with you like this every night, wake with you every morning. He thrust again, and she curled her nails into his shoulder with sharp ecstasy. Culmination swept over them in minutes, and they held one another tight as the throes of joy gripped them. Afterward, as he stroked his hands over her, he said, "I don't want to put off our life together any longer than I have to. I don't know what I did to deserve you." "You didn't have to do anything. You're you. That's all you need to be." 4 years later, the Queen of Valia had been warned her advanced maternal age meant she might have trouble conceiving. Since she was expected to produce an heir and a spare, she'd been urged to begin trying on her wedding night. As with everything else in the course of their relationship, she and Laszlo had seemed fated to wait. They tried for nearly a year and never once saw happy news on the pregnancy stick. It was demoralizing, but Laszlo insisted there was no pressure on her. Laszlo was Sofia's delegate in many halls of power, developing a reputation for pushing boundaries and taking risks. But above all, he was her most stalwart supporter, known best for his fearsome devotion to his wife. He assured her that they lived very full lives, and her brother could secure the throne if needed. As they closed in on a year of trying, they saw a fertility specialist. Laszlo took his test and was pronounced fertile. Sofia wanted to discuss whether it was time to see if any of her eggs she'd had frozen a few years ago were viable. The specialist ran a standard screen before beginning treatment and came back with the news that she was already pregnant. "I can't be," she said with disbelief while Laszlo reached for her and crushed her hand. His eyes were damp with joy. She was pregnant. So pregnant that when they went for her first scan, they learned she was carrying twins. "You're a twin! How can you be this shocked?" Laszlo asked through his astonished laughter. "Because it's a miracle. It makes me too happy." "No such thing," he chided. It seemed to be true. Aside from the usual discomforts of pregnancy, she carried to term and delivered naturally. As she held her son and Laszlo held their daughter, they were both smiling through tears. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she told him. "You did this, you know." "Oh, Solent," he choked. "You just birthed 2 babies. I held a pair of scissors and tried not to faint. Let's leave credit where it's due." "You know what I mean. You didn't have to choose this life, but you did. You made this possible for me. Thank you." "I would do it again. It's worth everything we've been through to see that beautiful light in your face." He glanced down. "And in these ones, how will we tell them apart, do you think?" She laughed, but wanted to cry too. She was so overcome with love for him. "Colored caps. It worked for Luca and me." He chuckled and came to sit on the bed, being careful of the babies they held between them as he leaned in to kiss her. "I love you, my beautiful queen." The end.